You ever waited for a bus so late at night that the air itself felt wrong? I'm not talking about just cold or lonely. I mean the kind of wrong that makes you feel like the street has been holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's how it was that night. The bus stop stood in the middle of a narrow road, half swallowed by a thick rolling mist, the kind that clings to your clothes and creeps into your lungs. The only sound was the faint, uneven hum of a flickering streetlight. Overhead, every few seconds, it would dim just enough to make the shadows stretch a little farther, a little closer. I kept checking the time on my phone. Jam 11:57 p.m. The bus was late, or maybe I was early. Either way, no one else was around. That was the first thing that made me uneasy. Usually there's at least one other soul, a stranger you pretend not to notice, but tonight, nothing. Just me. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the air was thick with some invisible weight, pressing against my chest. My ears strained for the sound of a distant engine, but all I got was the soft hiss of the fog sliding across the pavement. You probably wouldn't believe me, but I swear I saw shapes in that fog, faint slow-moving silhouettes that didn't quite look human. They never came close enough to see clearly, but each time I turned away, I had the distinct feeling they'd moved closer. I told myself it was my imagination. After all, I was tired. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and forget the strange tension prickling at the back of my neck. But then, the sound came. At first, just a low vibration beneath my feet, almost like the ground itself was humming. Then it grew into the slow, groaning whine of brakes. I looked down the street, and there it was, too pale. Round headlights cutting through the mist, sliding toward me with a deliberate, almost unnatural smoothness. The bus emerged from the fog like a shadow given form. Its windows were dark, reflecting nothing, and its body seemed older than it should have been, paint faded, metal dented in places, but still somehow alive. I don't know why, but I felt like it had been watching me long before I'd seen it. It didn't pull up to the curb right away. Instead, it slowed to a crawl, its brakes sighing in long, drawn-out breaths, until it finally stopped in front of me with a sound like an exhale. The doors opened with a sluggish, almost reluctant creak. Warm air spilled out, not fresh or inviting, but thick, stale, and faintly metallic, like the scent of old coins left in your hand too long. I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to turn around and walk away, maybe even run. But then I remembered how empty the street was, how far from home I still stood, and how the fog had been moving, curling, as if it wanted to push me toward the open doors. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that stepping onto that bus would change something, that whatever waited inside was not the kind of thing you could walk away from unchanged. I took one step forward. The second my foot hit the first stair, the streetlight behind me went out, leaving the world outside swallowed in darkness. The driver sat in shadow. At first I thought he was wearing a cap pulled low, but then I realized his head seemed to still. No shifting, no subtle movements, just a rigid silhouette framed by the dim, yellowish light from the dashboard. His hands, long thin fingers with skin that looked like stretched parchment, rested on the steering wheel without a twitch. "Fare?" he asked, voice low and gravelly, though his mouth never moved. The sound came from somewhere deeper, like the hollow echo of a tunnel. I fumbled with my wallet, pulling out a crumpled bill. As I extended it toward him, I noticed something that made my stomach knot. His fingernails were dark, not with dirt, but with something that looked thicker, almost tar-like. He didn't take the money. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, and the air between us seemed to grow heavier. "You've already paid," he said. The words hit me like a slap. I hadn't ridden a bus all week, and I certainly hadn't bought a ticket for this one. But his tone wasn't suggestive, it was absolute. Like he was stating a fact about me that I didn't know yet. I stepped further inside. The doors closed behind me with a sound that felt less like machinery and more like teeth snapping shut. The interior was dim, lit by flickering overhead bulbs that seemed to buzz with a rhythm just slightly too slow to be comfortable. The seats were upholstered in cracked, faded vinyl, but it wasn't the wear that caught my attention. It was the stains. Dark patches scattered across the fabric, irregular in shape and size. I didn't want to think about what had caused them. The bus was not empty, that at first I thought the passengers were just still, as if they were asleep or deep in thought. But the longer I looked, the more I realized something was wrong. Their heads all tilted at unnatural angles, their eyes either closed too tightly or wide open and glassy, unblinking stares. A woman in the third row had her hands clasped around a purse that seemed to be leaking a thin, black liquid. The man beside her had his mouth stretched into a grin far too wide to be human, frozen in place as if it had been there for years. None of them moved when I walked past. I chose a seat near the middle, close enough to the driver that I could still see him if I craned my neck, but far enough to put some space between me and the other passengers. The bus lurched forward before I had even fully sat down, as if it had been waiting impatiently for me. The windows were worse than useless. Instead of showing the street outside, they seemed to ripple faintly, like heat haze on asphalt. Shapes moved beyond them, tall, thin figures that kept pace with the bus, no matter how fast we went. Every now and then, one would press close, and the distortion would bend around it, giving me the faintest impression of a face pressed against glass. I tried to look away, but the sensation of being watched was constant, unrelenting. I could feel my heart beat in my throat. The driver never checked the road. His head stayed perfectly still, his gaze fixed forward. Yet the bus swerved around invisible turns and stopped at intersections I couldn't see. There was no city out there, no familiar streetlights or storefronts, only the shifting haze, and those following shapes. A sound broke through the hum of the engine. Soft at first, almost like the rustle of paper, then sharper, like nails tapping against metal. It was coming from the seat directly behind me. I told myself not to turn around, that whatever was back there would be worse if I looked. But human curiosity is a cruel thing. I turned. The seat was empty, but the space above it wasn't. Hanging in the air, inches from my face, was something like a hand, pale, almost translucent, with impossibly long fingers that tapered into sharp points. It didn't move toward me. It didn't retreat. It just hovered there, as if deciding whether or not I was worth touching. I jerked forward in my seat, my breath catching. When I looked back again, it was gone. The driver spoke without turning his head. "You might want to hold on," he said. Before I could ask why, the bus took a sudden, impossible turn, one that felt like the world itself had folded in on us. The lights flickered, the passengers' heads swayed like marionettes on loose strings, and the mist outside turned pitch black. We weren't in the city anymore. The blackness outside the windows was not just darkness, it was absence. No streetlights, no stars, no moon. Just a suffocating void that pressed against the glass like a living thing, testing the barrier between us. I couldn't tell if the bus was still moving or if the world itself had stopped shifting around us. My stomach told me we were in motion, but my eyes said otherwise. A faint hum began to rise, not from the engine, but from the walls of the bus itself. It was low at first, like the vibration of distant machinery, but it grew until it seemed to pulse in my bones. The passengers didn't react, though I noticed something subtle. Their bodies seemed to sink deeper into their seats, as though the vibration were pulling them in. I swallowed hard. My hands gripped the edge of my seat so tightly my knuckles ached. The driver still hadn't moved his head, but his voice came again, drifting back toward me like smoke. "They're going to get on now." Before I could process the words, the bus shuddered to a stop. The doors creaked open. From the darkness outside, something began to board. I say something because I can't call it a person, not in the way you and I understand people. Its form was humanoid, yes, but stretched thin, with joints bending just a little too far. It moved in jerks, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, its limbs twitching with each step. Its face, if it was a face, was smooth, featureless except for a faint indentation where eyes should be. As it passed me, I caught the scent of something damp and earthy, like freshly dug soil. It didn't take a seat. Instead, it walked slowly down the aisle, stopping at each passenger, leaning close as if whispering something only they could hear. Every time it did, their heads tilted just a bit further, their eyes sinking deeper into that unnatural stillness. When it reached the woman with the leaking purse, she opened it wider. The black liquid spilled onto the floor, thick and slow, spreading toward my shoes. The thing bent down, its featureless face hovering inches from hers. She whispered something I couldn't hear, and it straightened again. Continuing down the aisle, I tried to make myself small, to become invisible. It didn't work. It stopped in front of me. The absence where its eyes should be seemed to fix on my face. My breath caught, and I had the terrible thought that if I moved even a fraction, it would follow. Its head tilted, sharp and bird-like. The smell of soil grew stronger. Then, in a voice that wasn't sound but sensation, as though the words were being pressed directly into my skull, it said, "You shouldn't be here." My heart slammed against my ribs. My throat felt dry, but I forced myself to speak. Where am I supposed to be?" I whispered. It didn't answer. Instead, it straightened and began to move toward the back of the bus. But as it did, I saw something shift in the windows. The blackness outside flickered, and for a heartbeat I saw an image in the glass dot. It was me. Not me sitting there in the bus, but me standing in the middle of an empty road, staring up at the headlights of an approaching vehicle. I blinked and the blackness returned. The doors closed. The bus started moving again, the vibration returning stronger than before. I felt it in my teeth, my skull, my chest. The passengers seemed almost boneless now, sinking into their seats like they were part of them. The driver finally spoke again. "Not long now," he said. "You'll understand soon." The shapes outside the window returned, only now, they weren't keeping pace. They were pulling ahead, disappearing into the blackness. Something in my gut told me they were leading us somewhere. The hum grew louder, the air grew thicker. My own thoughts began to feel slow, as if wading through molasses. Then the bus stopped, again, and this time, I realized it wasn't at a stop. It was at the edge of something vast, something I couldn't see, but could feel like standing on the rim of a deep well and knowing it has no bottom. The driver finally turned his head, and that's when I realized he didn't have a face either. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't fear in the normal sense, not the kind you get when you hear a sudden noise in the dark. This was older, deeper, the kind of fear your body remembers before your mind does. The driver's head was tilted slightly, like he was studying me. But how could he study me if he had no eyes? His face, if I can even call it that, was a pale, porous surface, like soft clay left out in the rain. Where the mouth should have been was only the faint suggestion of a curve. And yet, I swear I heard him smile. "We've arrived," he said. The doors opened with a hiss that sounded almost alive. The void outside shifted, and I saw movement. At first it was subtle, shapes barely emerging from the darkness, shuffling, twitching, some crawling. Their silhouettes didn't make sense. Limbs were too long or too short, or bent in the wrong direction. Some moved with a jerking stop and start, while others glided unnaturally, their legs dragging uselessly beneath them. One of them stepped into the dim light from the bus interior, and my throat closed. It was wearing a bus uniform. The name tag was shattered, half melted, but I could make out two letters, E and L. The rest of the face, yes, this one had a face, was wrong in ways my mind still tries to reject. The skin sagged unevenly, and the eyes, they weren't looking at me, they were looking through me, like I wasn't the important part of the room. Behind it, more emerged. Their movements carried a strange rhythm, as if they were answering some sound I couldn't hear. The humming inside the bus deepened in pitch, vibrating my sternum until I thought my ribs might crack. The passengers began to stand, one by one, their limbs moving sluggishly but deliberately. The woman with the leaking purse lifted it, black liquid still, seeping from the seams, leaving a trail as she walked toward the open doors. The tall man in the suit followed, his head hanging so low I wondered if his neck had broken years ago. They didn't hesitate. They stepped into the dark and were swallowed by it, their forms fading after only a few paces. I stayed frozen. Every instinct I had screamed to stay put. But then the driver, or whatever he was, spoke again. "You'll stop." I shook my head, small at first, then more forcefully. No, I'm not getting off here." He leaned forward, not in a human motion, but in a slow, bending melt, like his body didn't quite understand gravity. "You already did," he whispered. The floor beneath me shifted. It wasn't a lurch or a jolt, it was more like the surface of the bus had turned to something soft, spongy, almost alive. My shoes sank into it, and I felt something move underneath, brushing the soles of my feet. Before I could react, I was no longer in my seat. I was standing at the doors. The smell hit me first, that heavy, damp soil smell from before, but stronger, now, laced with the coppery temps of old blood. The dark outside pulsed faintly, as though it were breathing, waiting for me to step in. I turned back to the driver for some kind of explanation, some proof that this was just a nightmare, but he was no longer looking at me. His head was turned toward the aisle, watching something else. I followed his gaze, and saw that the bus wasn't empty after all. At the very back, someone was still sitting. It was me, not me as I was in that moment, but me, different. Pale, slack-faced, eyes half-lidded, like I'd been drained of every thought. My hands rested on my lap, fingers twitching occasionally, and when I opened my mouth to speak, no sound came out. The other me slowly lifted its head, meeting my eyes, and then it smiled. It was my smile, but it wasn't mine. The driver's voice seeped in, barely more than a breath. "You're catching the return trip." The doors closed. The hiss of the doors sealing shut wasn't mechanical this time. It sounded wet, like two pieces of raw meat pressed together. The air inside the bus thickened, clinging to my skin, coating the back of my throat with something sour and metallic. Spun toward the front, toward the driver, but he was gone. Not walked away, not faded, just gone, as if he'd been erased from the scene. The driver's seat sat empty, and yet the wheel turned on its own, twitching left and right in slow, deliberate movements. I took a shaky step backward. The other, me at the back of the bus, was still staring, head tilted slightly, mouth curling into that same unsettling smile. My mind scrambled for logic, for something rational to grab onto. Maybe it was a reflection in the rear glass, distorted by the lighting, but then it blinked slowly, deliberately, and I saw the wet gleam of its eyes. The bus began to move again, but the scenery outside had changed. No longer the endless void, now there were shapes. Tall looming buildings made of, I don't know. It wasn't brick, or wood, or steel. It looked like they were built from slabs of something organic, like enormous pieces of bone fused together, the surface etched with deep, spiraling grooves that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. The windows rattled, but it wasn't from the road, it was from the sound. A deep, low hum had returned, layered now with something new, whispers. Hundreds of them, some in languages I didn't recognize, others repeating fragments of sentences over and over, looping endlessly. I felt movement behind me. The other passengers, or what was left of them, had returned to their seats, but they weren't as I'd last seen them. Their skin looked thinner now, almost translucent, veins dark and branching beneath the surface. Eyes bulged slightly, as though they'd been forced to see something too vast for a human mind. The woman with the leaking purse was nearest to me. She lifted the bag again, tilting it so that the black liquid dripped onto the aisle. Only now, it wasn't just liquid. Something small and pale floated inside, tiny cold shapes like. I forced myself not to look closer. The tall man in the suit raised his head for the first time, and I realized his mouth had been sewn shut with thin black thread. Each time the bus hit a bump, a drop of dark fluid escaped from the corners of his lips. I staggered toward the middle of the bus, desperate to get away from all of them. The humming grew louder with each step, and I realized it wasn't coming from the vehicle at all. It was coming from me, not the me walking down the aisle, the other me, still sitting in the back. Its mouth moved now, sound vibrating through the air, that same impossible hum resonating in my chest. My vision blurred, and for a moment, the aisle stretched impossibly long, like I'd never reach the back. My legs grew heavy, each step taking more effort than the last. And then, just as my knees buckled, the bus shuddered to a stop. This time the doors didn't open. Instead, the walls began to ripple, the materials softening like heated wax. The grooves on the bone like buildings outside shifted faster now, swirling in patterns that made my eyes water. The other me stood. It didn't walk toward me, it glided, feet barely touching the floor. The closer it got, the stronger the hum became, until my teeth ached, and my vision led. It stopped just inches from my face. I saw every detail, the way the skin was paler than mine, the faint blue tint under the eyes, the almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of its mouth, and then, slowly, it leaned forward, pressing its lips to my ear. What it said wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my stomach turn to ice. "You've been here before." Before I could respond, it reached up and touched my forehead with one cold finger. The world shattered. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the bus anymore. Or maybe I was. The seat beneath me felt the same, that coarse, worn fabric rough against my fingertips, but everything else was wrong. The air wasn't stale. It was heavy, almost liquid. I tried to breathe and felt resistance, like I was inhaling through thick syrup. My ears rang with the aftertaste of that hum, still lingering deep inside my skull. And then I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from above, or from outside. It was coming from the seams in the bus itself. Thin, glowing cracks had appeared between the panels, spilling a dim, pulsing red light into the space. I traced one with my eyes, following it up toward the roof, and realized the cracks weren't random. They formed a shape. A circle with lines through it, and something at its center, a symbol I couldn't name. But that made my stomach twist as though I'd swallowed glass. I turned toward the window, hoping for some kind of familiar landmark, but the world outside was worse. The bone-like towers were still there, but now they pulsed in rhythm with the bus's glow. Between them, something moved. Long, sinewy shapes that slid along the surfaces, twisting in ways no limbs should twist. They were too far away to make out their faces, if they even had faces, but I knew they were watching. A sound broke through the humming, sharp and wet. I looked down. The aisle carpet was darkening. Something was seeping up through the floor, not dripping from above, rising from below, as though the ground beneath the bus was bleeding. The liquid was thick, deep red, and carried a smell I can't even describe without tasting it again in my mouth. The passengers didn't move, not at first, then. In unison, they turned their heads toward me. Every single one of them. The woman, with the purse, tilted her head until her neck bones cracked loudly. The tall man's sewn lips stretched into what might have been a smile if it weren't for the black thread holding them shut. And then, I heard it. Footsteps. Not inside the bus. Outside, pacing slowly along the length of the vehicle, the sound echoed, hollow and deliberate, like boots on wet concrete. I couldn't see who it was through the cracked and glowing panels, but every pass felt heavier, like whatever it was dragging. Something along the other me was gone. I scanned the seats, the aisle, even the ceiling, but it had vanished completely. That absence was almost worse than its presence, at least when it was here. I knew where it was. The footsteps stopped, and then, impossibly, they started again, inside the bus, one row behind me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. Slowly, with agonizing precision, a hand came to rest on my shoulder. The skin was colder than ice, but dry, textured like aged paper. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The hand squeezed, just enough for me to feel the sharp edges of fingernails pressing into my skin. And then, a voice, not the hum this time, but a whisper, almost gentle. "You've been waiting for this ride your whole life." The lights flickered, the hand let go. When I finally turned, there was no one there except the driver. But it wasn't the man I'd seen before. This driver was wrong. His face was too smooth, like it had been stretched over something else. His eyes were just pits, swirling with the same red light that pulsed from the cracks. And when he smiled, his teeth were long and thin, perfectly straight, but there were too many of them. "End of the line," he said, in a voice that didn't match his mouth, deeper, echoing like it came from a cavern beneath the earth. The bus lurched forward. We weren't driving on a road anymore, we were falling. The fall wasn't like falling in a dream, where gravity feels playful, exaggerated, almost fake. This was a plunge that pulled at my organs, pressed my ribs inward, and stretched my skin against my bones. My ears popped so hard I thought my eardrums might burst, and the air roared past in a constant, low scream. The passengers didn't react. They sat there, as if gravity had no claim over them. No one reached for a seatbelt, there weren't any anyway, and no one looked at me. Their heads stayed perfectly forward, their spines rigid, their eyes fixed on a horizon I couldn't see. Outside the windows, there was no sky, no earth, only a black void shot through with jagged streaks of white, like cracks in porcelain. We weren't just falling, we were slipping between things, layers, worlds. Then came the smell. Not rot, not sulfur, worse, it was the scent of something that had been alive once, but had been kept alive far too long, a thing that wanted to die but couldn't. My stomach heaved, and I had to press my mouth shut to keep from vomiting. A voice, not from any single point, but from everywhere at once, murmured, "Don't look down." Naturally, I looked down. The aisle wasn't the same. The floorboards had pulled apart, revealing a thin, impossibly deep gap. Through it, I saw something moving, a sea of pale hands reaching upward, clawing, grasping, as if the fall had disturbed them. The fingers twitched, twisted, and some of them bent in wrong directions, like broken marionette strings. The driver's voice cut through, sharper this time. "Next stop," he said, and I realized his mouth wasn't moving. The words were just in my head, as though I'd thought them, myself. The bus jolted violently. I slammed sideways into the cold window, and when I opened my eyes again, the void outside had changed. We were passing through a landscape made entirely of mirrors. Each one reflected the bus at a slightly different angle, but not the same bus I was on. One reflection, the seats were filled with children in school uniforms, their faces blank, their eyes bleeding black tears. In another, the bus was on fire, yet the passengers sat motionless as the flames curled around their heads. And then I saw myself. Or too many of me. Every reflection had me in a different position, one smiling, one screaming, one asleep, one pressing their hands desperately against the glass. One version of me wasn't on the bus at all. It stood outside, watching, holding something in its hand that I couldn't quite make out. I tried to look closer, but the bus sped past, and the image was gone. The mirrors ended abruptly, replaced by an unbroken wall of fog so dense it pressed against the glass. It wasn't natural fog, it didn't swirl or shift. It felt solid, like we were carving a tunnel through cotton that didn't want us there. The driver whispered again, "They'll try to get on, don't open the door." As if on cue, something knocked from outside. Just a soft tap-tap at first. Then another, then dozens, all over the side of the bus. I could hear them breathing through the metal. One knock came from directly beside my head. Against all reason, I looked. The face pressed to the window was almost human. Almost. Its skin was stretched so thin it looked ready to tear, and its eyes were entirely white, rolling in opposite directions. Its lips moved slowly, silently forming words. I shouldn't have been able to hear them through the glass and fog and roar of the bus, but I did. Let me in. You're one of us now. The glass bulged inward. I gripped the armrest so hard, my knuckles burned, and the driver shouted in my head this time, "Don't look again." The knocks stopped instantly. We burst out of the fog into a place I don't even know if I have the vocabulary for it. The ground wasn't ground. It was a shifting, writhing expanse of something alive. The sky was a vast, open mouth, its teeth as large as buildings, slowly grinding in anticipation, and the bus was driving straight toward. You know that moment when your body knows it's about to die before your mind catches up? That's what this felt like. My skin prickled, my chest tightened, and every nerve screamed at me to do something, but there was nowhere to run. The bus thundered forward on a road that seemed to form beneath its wheels, weaving over the undulating surface of that living ground. The skymouth above wasn't just waiting for us, it was breathing. Each inhale pulled at the bus like an invisible tide, rattling the loose panels and tugging at my own breath. The exhale was worse. It carried a sound like wet fabric tearing, followed by a chorus of muffled cries, as if the air itself was stitched from suffering. I turned to the other passengers. Nothing. No movement, no fear, just those waxy faces, staring straight ahead, their eyes reflecting that impossible horizon. Then something flickered in their expressions, barely perceptible. A twitch in a cheek, a curl at the corner of a lip, and I realized they were smiling. The road pitched downward sharply, and the bus picked up speed. I stumbled into the aisle, grabbing for anything to keep upright. My hand brushed against the arm of the man in the seat beside me, and I froze. His skin was cold, not like cold air or chilled metal. This was the cold of something that had no business being warm in the first place. Beneath my fingers, there was no pulse, no movement of muscle, just a hollow stillness. The driver's voice seeped into my thoughts again. "You can still get off, but you won't like where it leaves you." That was when I saw it, halfway down the aisle on the left side. One seat was empty, except for a small, perfectly black envelope. No light reflected off it. The air around it seemed to blur slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. I couldn't explain why, but I knew it was meant for me. I took a step toward it, and the moment my foot hit the aisle, the bus shuddered hard, enough to throw me against the seats. Outside, the ground began to open, not cracks, but mouths, hundreds of them, each one whispering in a voice I recognized. My voice. Every whisper said something different, but one phrase came back again and again, overlapping until it was all I could hear. "You shouldn't have stayed on." The driver slammed the brakes. It didn't feel like a normal stop. It felt like the bus had slammed into time itself. Everything jolted forward, but didn't quite finish moving, like reality had been caught in mid-breath. The doors hissed open. Fog rolled in immediately, curling low around the floor. I couldn't see anything outside, but I could hear the knocks. Again, this time, they weren't asking to come in, they were beckoning. Every instinct told me not to move, but the black envelope was still there, waiting, and I couldn't shake the thought that opening it might give me the truth, or at least an explanation. The driver's voice sharpened in my head. "Choose now." The passengers all turned, their heads toward me at the same time. No blinking, no breath, just those faint, knowing smiles. I reached for the envelope. The moment my fingers touched it, the world outside the windows changed. Not gradually, but in a violent lurch. The skymouth vanished, replaced by an endless field of old, broken buses, each one abandoned, their windows shattered, their doors hanging open like slack jaws. Some of them still had passengers inside, passengers who looked at me. The driver stood, or rather, unfolded himself from the seat, his limbs too long, his movements too fluid to be human. His hat fell forward, hiding most of his face, but I caught a glimpse of a grin that stretched far too wide. "You've been here before," he said aloud for the first time. His voice wasn't deep or menacing, it was flat, almost casual, which somehow made it worse. "You just don't remember what happened last time." The bus lurched forward again, moving deeper into that graveyard of ghost buses. The fog, trailing after us like a predator, and somewhere deep inside me, a memory began to stir, one I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. The memory didn't return all at once. It came in pieces, flashes, fragments, half-formed impressions, like trying to assemble a puzzle where some of the pieces were alive and refused to fit together. First, the sound, the same deep rhythmic thud I had heard at the very beginning of this nightmare, not just from the outside, but from beneath my skin, as if my own bones remembered the beat. Then, the smell, a mix of hot metal, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, the way flowers smell when they've been left too long in a vase. Their water cloudy and rotting. And finally, the face, not the driver's face, my face. I saw myself, sitting in a seat near the front, my head turned toward the window, my reflection in the glass not quite matching the movements I made. That other me was smiling faintly, the same unsettling curve I'd seen on all the other passengers. The truth slid into my mind like a shard of ice. I had been on this bus before, and I hadn't gotten off. The driver's voice slithered in, quieter now, almost coaxing. It's easier when you stop fighting it. You came back because you wanted to. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the longer I looked out at the endless rows of abandoned buses, the more familiar they felt. Not just familiar, personal. I could name some of them. Each was a memory I had boarded and never truly left. The black envelope still rested in my hand, cold and impossibly heavy. For its size, I hesitated, my thumb tracing the edges, before finally breaking the seal. Inside was a bus ticket. It had no destination, no time, no printed text at all. Just a thin smear of something dark across the surface, too red to be ink. As I stared at it, the rows of derelict buses outside began to shift. Not like they were moving physically, but as though the world itself was reordering them. One bus in particular slid forward into view. The number on its front was smeared, but I recognized the shape, the color, the dent in its side. It was this bus. The lights inside flickered, and for a split second, I saw the seats filled, but not with passengers. They were packed with shadows, their shapes humanoid but incomplete, as if someone had drawn them in a hurry and forgotten the details. Each shadow leaned forward slightly, all of them focused on me. I clutched the ticket tighter, suddenly afraid of what would happen if I let go. The driver chuckled under his breath. Every ride ends in the same place, only the road changes. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the bus graveyard, until all I could see was the faint glow of the headlights ahead. The road returned, stretching into the dark like a taut thread. I realized then that my seat felt wrong, softer, warmer. When I looked down, I saw that the fabric beneath me wasn't fabric at all. It was skin, pale, veined and pulsing, faintly with each bump in the road. I shot to my feet, heart hammering, but every other seat was the same. The passengers didn't move, didn't blink, but now, I could hear something coming from them. A faint, synchronized hum, like the sound of bees trapped inside a jar. It was getting louder. I stumbled down the aisle, desperate for some kind of escape, when the bus gave another violent jolt. The windows went black, as if the glass had been replaced with slabs of obsidian. I couldn't see anything outside, but I could hear whispers pressing against the glass. One voice rose above the others. It was my own. Next time, don't take the seat. The driver reached up and pulled a cord that I hadn't noticed before. A sharp bell rang, echoing too long in the confined space. The sound made my vision stutter the same way a bad film. Real jumps, and suddenly, I was standing at the front of the bus, staring down the open doorway. The fog outside was gone. In its place was a narrow, unlit street I'd never seen before, lined with houses that seemed to lean in toward each other, as if whispering about me. The driver tilted his head, the shadow under his hat stretching unnaturally far down his chest. Your stop. My stop. I looked at the street, then back at the aisle of silent passengers. Some part of me knew stepping off might save me from whatever was waiting deeper along this road. But another part whispered something darker. Stepping off might only take me back to where I'd started, and I wasn't sure which was worse. I could no longer feel my feet touching the floor. The cold running through my body came from within, as if something had hollowed me out. The bus moved in silence, and the few faces that remained now seemed more like shadows than people. They didn't blink, they didn't move, they just stared at me. The driver turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. It wasn't human. His skin was dry and cracked, like old wood. His teeth were thin and unnaturally long, but what truly froze me were his eyes, empty, like two windows opening into a place I was never meant to see. We're almost at your stop, he said, but the voice didn't echo in the air. It spoke directly inside my head. View outside the window was no longer the city. The streets were buried under a thick fog, and from within it, distorted shapes emerged, as if something was trying to cross over. Each figure stared at me, their expressions a twisted mix of pain and hunger. My body grew heavy. I wanted to stand, to run for the door, but the bus seemed endless. The aisle stretched like a living maze. The rows of seats multiplied, and behind each one there were more faces, more eyes. None of them blinked. That's when I felt the hand. Cold, thin, with sharp bones pressing into my shoulder. A woman's voice whispered into my ear, "Now, you're part of the ride." I turned and saw a woman in an old dress, the fabric worn and stained. Her smile was far too wide, and when she spoke again, her lips didn't move. The voice was inside my mind, just like the driver's. The bus lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw myself in my bedroom, sitting on my bed, drenched in sweat. But the next moment, I was back in the seat, with the aisle stretching endlessly before me. It was as if reality itself was being cut and pasted back together at random, just to disorient me. Then the bus stopped, the door opened, but outside, there was no street, only a grey void. A strong wind tried to pull me out, but the hand on my shoulder held me in place. "It's not your stop yet," the woman whispered. The driver looked at me one last time. "The ride never ends," he said. Before the door shut, the bus pulled away, and I noticed that the window beside me now reflected only darkness. No reflection of me, no reflection of them, nothing at all. In the end, there's only one certainty. The world we see may not be everything that exists. Leave a comment about what you think, and if you dare, come back here tomorrow. There's always another story waiting for you, but remember, some stories never end.